Pay attention to how differently you approach new people now. A conversation begins. Someone shows interest. A new acquaintance appears in your environment. And instead of opening yourself immediately the way you once did, something inside you pauses. Not out of suspicion, not out of hostility, just a quiet internal check. You listen more. You observe more. You allow time to reveal the person in front of you. This shift can feel strange if you remember how naturally connection once flowed for you. Earlier in life, openness often happened quickly. If someone seemed friendly, you welcomed them easily. If someone shared similar interests, you invested attention without hesitation. If someone showed enthusiasm toward you, the relationship felt promising almost immediately. This openness was not weakness. It was human warmth. The psyche naturally seeks connection. Human beings are social organisms, and forming bonds has always played a crucial role in emotional survival. For most of our evolutionary history, belonging to a group meant safety. Isolation meant vulnerability. Because of that, the nervous system evolved to respond positively to signals of inclusion. A friendly smile, shared humor, mutual interest. These signals activate trust quickly. But psychological development gradually changes how quickly that trust is given. You may notice that you still enjoy meeting people. You still appreciate conversation. You still value connection. But something in your approach has become more measured. You no longer assume that everyone deserves immediate emotional access to your inner world. Instead, you allow people to reveal themselves over time. At first, this change can raise uncomfortable questions. You might wonder, am I becoming distant? Why do I feel less open with people now? Why do fewer relationships feel worth investing in? Carl Jung believed that individuation often produces exactly this shift. As the psyche becomes more differentiated, unconscious merging with others decreases. Earlier in life, connection often happens through projection. You meet someone new, and your mind fills in the unknown parts of their personality with hopeful assumptions. You imagine compatibility. You imagine shared values. You imagine emotional safety. This projection creates a powerful sense of connection quickly, but projections can also blur perception. You may believe you know someone before you actually do. You may invest emotional energy before the relationship has demonstrated stability. Over time, experiences begin to challenge this pattern. You encounter people who initially seem trustworthy, but later reveal inconsistency. You invest in friendships that eventually show imbalance. You share personal thoughts with someone who later misuses that openness. These experiences are not failures. They are information. Carl Jung believed that every relational experience reveals something about our unconscious expectations. If we repeatedly trust too quickly, it often means we are projecting qualities onto others that we have not yet fully integrated within ourselves. For example, if you unconsciously project trustworthiness onto others, you may assume they possess integrity without observing whether their actions confirm it. If you project emotional safety, you may assume someone is capable of handling vulnerability before they demonstrate that capacity. Projection speeds up connection, but it also increases the risk of disappointment. As individuation progresses, projection gradually withdraws. This means you begin to see people more clearly rather than through imagined qualities. You become less eager to fill in the unknown parts of someone's character. Instead, you allow those parts to reveal themselves through behavior. This change often appears in simple, everyday interactions. You may notice that you share less personal information during early conversations, not because you are hiding yourself, but because you no longer feel compelled to expose your inner world immediately. You allow trust to develop gradually. You observe whether someone respects boundaries, whether they listen carefully, whether their actions match their words. This observational phase becomes more natural as psychological maturity increases. Earlier, your focus may have been on whether someone liked you. Now, your attention shifts toward whether someone is aligned with you. Alignment is different from approval. Approval feels flattering. Alignment feels stabilizing. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires differentiation, the process through which a person becomes psychologically distinct from the collective. This differentiation changes how relationships form. Instead of merging quickly, you maintain a clearer sense of your own center. You can engage socially while still observing whether the interaction supports your well-being. Another sign of this shift appears in how you respond to social invitations. Earlier in life, you may have felt obligated to say yes more often. You accepted invitations out of politeness. You maintained relationships out of habit. You gave time and attention to people simply because they were present in your environment. Now, something inside you evaluates those choices more carefully. You begin asking quieter questions. Does this connection feel genuine? Does this conversation bring clarity or confusion? Do I leave this interaction feeling energized or drained? These questions are not expressions of judgment. They are expressions of discernment. Discernment is one of the natural byproducts of individuation. As the psyche becomes more integrated, it becomes less tolerant of environments that disturb its internal balance. This does not mean you avoid people entirely. It means you become more selective about where you place your energy. And that selectivity can sometimes make your social circle appear smaller. But the reduction in quantity often corresponds with an increase in quality. You may notice that fewer relationships feel superficial. Conversations become deeper. Connections become more intentional. Carl Jung often emphasized that psychological growth requires withdrawing energy from unconscious patterns. Overexposure in relationships is often one of those patterns. Earlier, you may have shared your thoughts freely with many people because connection felt reassuring. Now, you recognize that intimacy requires trust, and trust must be demonstrated over time. This realization naturally changes how you let people into your life. You are still kind, still approachable, still open to meaningful relationships, but access to your deeper self is no longer automatic. It is something that develops gradually through shared experience and mutual respect. Some people will misunderstand this change. They may interpret your selectivity as distance. They may assume you have become less friendly or less interested in connection. But internally, the experience feels very different. It feels like clarity. You are no longer merging automatically with every social environment. You are choosing where your emotional energy belongs. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires exactly this kind of differentiation. The more clearly you understand yourself, the more carefully you choose the environments and relationships that support that understanding. Connection does not disappear, but it becomes intentional. You no longer open every door simply because someone knocks. You observe first. You listen. You allow time to reveal who the person truly is. And when alignment becomes clear, you welcome the connection with genuine presence. But when alignment is absent, you allow distance without guilt, because your circle is no longer built from automatic openness. It is built from conscious choice. And that shift marks the beginning of a more mature form of connection, one where access to your inner world is not granted by default, but earned through trust, consistency, and mutual respect. Walk into a social setting today and notice what your attention does. You observe more than you participate. You listen more than you reveal. You allow the environment to show itself before you decide how deeply to engage. Earlier in life, that sequence was often reversed. You enter situations with openness first. You gave attention quickly. You shared parts of yourself freely. And only later, sometimes much later, did you realize whether the connection was truly healthy. That pattern is extremely common. For many people, connection begins with enthusiasm, a new friendship, a new colleague, a new social environment, and the psyche instinctively moves toward participation because connection feels good. It brings novelty, shared experiences, the possibility of belonging. But over time, something begins to shift in how the psyche approaches these situations. You start noticing how differently people carry themselves, how some conversations feel clear, and others feel subtly draining. You begin recognizing patterns and behavior that once passed unnoticed. Inconsistent communication, superficial curiosity, subtle competition disguised as friendliness. People who ask personal questions but rarely share anything meaningful about themselves. Earlier in life, you might have overlooked these signals, not because you lacked intelligence, but because a desire for connection sometimes overshadowed discernment. When the psyche seeks belonging, it tends to emphasize similarities rather than differences. Carl Jung believed that projection plays a major role in this early phase of connection. When projection is active, we unconsciously attribute qualities to others that we hope they possess. Integrity, depth, emotional maturity. We assume alignment before it has been demonstrated. This is why certain relationships initially feel powerful. The connection feels immediate, almost effortless. But over time, reality begins replacing projection. Behavior reveals character. Consistency reveals intention. And the psyche begins adjusting its expectations. This adjustment is often uncomfortable because it requires seeing people more clearly than before. Someone who seemed trustworthy may reveal inconsistency. Someone who appeared supportive may reveal subtle envy. Someone who seemed emotionally open may reveal avoidance when conversations become real. These realizations are not pleasant, but they are necessary for psychological maturation. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires withdrawing projections so that we can see both ourselves and others accurately. When projections dissolve, relationships change. You stop assuming emotional compatibility. You stop offering unlimited access to your attention and vulnerability. Instead, you observe patterns. You notice whether someone listens as carefully as they speak. You notice whether someone respects boundaries. You notice whether they bring clarity into conversations or confusion. These observations gradually shape your relational decisions. You may notice that certain social interactions now feel exhausting, not because you dislike people, but because the conversations remain at the surface. Repeated small talk, repetitive complaints, conversations that circle around the same problems without genuine reflection. Earlier, you may have tolerated these interactions easily. Now they feel heavier, not because you have become judgmental, but because your psychological energy has become more valuable to you. Carl Jung often emphasized that psychological energy, what he called libido in the broader sense, must be invested consciously during individuation. Where you place your attention shapes your inner life. If your attention remains scattered across many shallow connections, the psyche remains diffused. But when attention becomes selective, psychological energy begins concentrating. This concentration deepens experience. Fewer conversations become more meaningful. Fewer relationships become more authentic. You may notice a shift especially in how you respond to invitations or social expectations. Earlier, you may have felt obligated to maintain certain connections. Friends of friends, professional acquaintances, people you interacted with simply because they were part of your environment. Now, something inside you evaluates these interactions more carefully, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. You begin asking yourself whether a connection truly supports your psychological environment. Does this relationship encourage growth? Does this person engage with honesty? Do our interactions leave both of us more grounded? These questions are not always asked consciously. Often they appear as subtle emotional signals. You may feel calm in some conversations and slightly tense in others. You may leave certain interactions feeling energized and others feeling quietly depleted. Your nervous system becomes an instrument of discernment. Carl Jung believed that as individuation progresses, the psyche becomes more sensitive to environments that either support or disturb inner balance. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is awareness. You become aware of the emotional atmosphere created by different people. Some individuals bring clarity into your life. Their presence feels calm. Their communication feels direct. Their behavior remains consistent over time. Others bring confusion. Their words shift depending on the situation. Their energy feels unpredictable. Their intentions remain unclear. Earlier, you might have tried to manage or repair those dynamics. Now, you often choose something simpler. Distance, not dramatic confrontation, not rejection, just less availability, less investment, less emotional exposure. This decision can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you once identified as someone who was always accessible, someone who listened, someone who helped. But individuation gradually teaches a different lesson. Not everyone deserves equal access to your emotional world. Access must be matched with responsibility. Carl Jung believed that psychological growth requires protecting the integrity of the self. If the self becomes too exposed to environments that distort it, integration becomes difficult. That is why discernment emerges naturally during this phase of development. You become more attentive to where your time goes, where your energy goes, where your vulnerability goes, and slowly, your relational landscape begins to reorganize. Some connections deepen because mutual respect becomes clearer. Some connections fade because they were sustained mainly through habit or convenience. And the circle around you becomes smaller, but more stable, more intentional, more aligned with who you are becoming. This reduction in social noise often produces an unexpected emotional effect. Calm. Your mind becomes quieter. Your relationships become clearer. Your time feels less fragmented. Carl Jung believed that individuation ultimately leads to a more coherent personality, and coherence requires selecting environments that support psychological integration. This does not mean isolating from the world. It means interacting with the world consciously, choosing connections that reflect who you truly are rather than who you once felt obligated to be. Your circle may be smaller, but it is no longer random. It is formed through clarity, and that clarity protects the integrity of your inner life. Look closely at the way you evaluate relationships now, not with harsh judgment, not with superiority, but with a level of clarity that did not exist before. Someone may enter your life with charm, enthusiasm, or confidence. Earlier, those qualities might have been enough to establish trust quickly. A sense of excitement about the connection would carry the interaction forward. Now something different happens. The initial impression still registers, but it no longer determines your decision. You watch, you listen, you observe how the person behaves when things are simple and when things become complicated. This shift is one of the most reliable signs that psychological differentiation is taking place. Carl Jung believed that individuation sharpens perception. As projection withdraws and identity stabilizes, the psyche becomes less fascinated with appearance and more attentive to patterns. In earlier stages of life, relationships often begin through emotional resonance. You feel understood. You feel noticed. You feel a sense of similarity. That emotional resonance can create the impression of deep compatibility. But emotional resonance alone does not always indicate alignment. Sometimes it simply reflects shared wounds, shared insecurities, shared unconscious patterns. Two people can feel intensely connected because they are reflecting each other's unresolved material. This is why some relationships begin with great intensity, but later reveal instability. Jung described this phenomenon as unconscious participation. Two individuals unconsciously merge their emotional patterns without recognizing the deeper forces involved. The connection feels powerful because it activates psychological material that has not yet been integrated. But once individuation begins, unconscious participation becomes less attractive, not because you reject connection, but because you begin recognizing its structure. You can sense when a conversation is driven by genuine curiosity rather than emotional projection. You can notice when someone listens with attention instead of simply waiting to speak. You can recognize when someone takes responsibility for their behavior instead of shifting blame. These signals begin forming your relational compass. Your standards are no longer built around superficial compatibility. They begin organizing themselves around psychological integrity. Does this person show consistency? Do their words and actions align? Can they tolerate disagreement without becoming defensive? Do they respect boundaries when they appear? Earlier, you may have ignored some of these questions, not intentionally, but because the desire for connection sometimes outweighed the need for discernment. Now the balance changes. You still appreciate warmth. You still enjoy humor. You still welcome friendly interaction. But deeper access to your life becomes conditional on something more substantial, trust, and trust develops slowly. Carl Jung believed that psychological maturity requires recognizing the difference between projection and perception. Projection imagines qualities in another person. Perception observes qualities over time. As projection dissolves, perception sharpens. You stop assuming depth where none has yet been demonstrated. You stop offering emotional vulnerability to people who have not shown the capacity to handle it. You stop explaining yourself repeatedly to people who prefer misunderstanding. Instead, you allow behavior to reveal character, and this observational patience naturally reshapes your social world. Some relationships become stronger because they withstand this new level of awareness. Others fade quietly because their foundation was built on projection rather than reality. This does not mean you reject people. It means you no longer invite everyone into your inner life. Carl Jung often emphasized that individuation requires protecting the emerging self from environments that disrupt integration. When the psyche begins organizing itself more clearly, it becomes sensitive to influences that distort its balance. This sensitivity can initially feel uncomfortable. You may notice that certain environments now feel overwhelming. Crowded social settings, constant noise, conversations filled with gossip or superficial comparison. Earlier, these environments might have felt normal. Now they feel misaligned with the direction your inner life is moving, and so your behavior adjusts. You spend more time in spaces that support reflection. You choose conversations that allow genuine exchange. You invest in relationships where psychological depth is possible. This selectivity is not isolation. It is alignment. Carl Jung believed that individuation gradually moves a person away from unconscious conformity with collective. As identity strengthens internally, the need to participate in every social dynamic decreases. You do not feel compelled to belong everywhere. You do not feel obligated to maintain every connection. You choose environments and relationships that support psychological coherence. And this choice creates a powerful shift in how you experience connection. Your relationships become fewer, but also more meaningful. Conversations move beyond surface politeness. Mutual understanding deepens. Trust builds slowly but becomes far more stable. Earlier, social life may have felt expansive but scattered. Now it becomes focused, intentional, aligned with the person you are becoming. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." This clarity of vision affects how you recognize others as well. When you begin seeing yourself clearly, you also begin seeing others more clearly. You notice emotional maturity. You notice self-awareness. You notice authenticity. And you are naturally drawn toward people who embody those qualities. At the same time, you become less interested in relationships that operate primarily through performance or unconscious dynamics, not out of criticism, but because they no longer resonate with your inner direction. This is why your circle becomes smaller, not because you reject people, but because you choose depth over quantity. Carl Jung believed that individuation is not about withdrawing from humanity. It is about relating to humanity from a place of psychological integrity. You still value connection. You still appreciate companionship, but you allow those connections to form around authenticity rather than necessity. And as this process unfolds, the structure of your relationships becomes clearer. Fewer people gain access to your inner world, but those who do encounter something real. Presence, honesty, mutual respect. Your circle may be smaller, but the relationships inside it carry a different quality. They are no longer based on convenience or projection. They are built on shared awareness. And that kind of connection does not require many people. It requires the right ones. At some point, the change becomes undeniable. Your circle is smaller, not dramatically, not in a way that feels lonely, but noticeably more selective. There are fewer people with access to your time, your thoughts, and your emotional world. And the question naturally appears, am I becoming closed off? Carl Jung believed that individuation often produces this exact moment of reflection. As the psyche differentiates from unconscious social patterns, relationships begin reorganizing themselves. Earlier in life, openness often came from instinct. You trusted quickly. You shared freely. You participated in many social dynamics simply because connection felt natural and reassuring. But connection formed through instinct can also blur boundaries. Projection fills in the unknown parts of people's character. Expectation replaces observation. And sometimes, emotional energy becomes scattered across relationships that do not truly support your inner development. Individuation slowly corrects this. You begin observing people more clearly. You become aware of how different interactions affect your internal state. Some conversations leave you calm and thoughtful. Others leave you drained or unsettled. Some people bring honesty and depth. Others bring confusion, competition, or superficiality. This awareness naturally changes your choices. You no longer assume that every connection deserves the same level of access. You no longer invest emotional energy automatically. You allow time to reveal character. Carl Jung believed that psychological maturity requires protecting the integrity of the emerging self. When the psyche begins organizing itself around deeper values, it becomes more attentive to the environments and relationships that influence it. Discernment emerges naturally from that awareness. You are not building walls. You are recognizing where openness belongs. This distinction is important. Walls block connection entirely. Discernment allows connection, but only where mutual respect, honesty, and alignment are present. Because of that, your social world may appear smaller from the outside, but internally, it often feels calmer. Conversations carry more substance. Relationships feel more reciprocal. Trust develops more slowly, but it also becomes more stable. You are no longer surrounded by many people. You are connected with the right ones. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." As your inner vision becomes clearer, your relational choices reflect that clarity. You recognize what supports your psychological balance, and you quietly move closer to those environments. Before we close, take a moment to reflect honestly. Has your circle become smaller over time? If so, does it feel like isolation, or does it feel like clarity? Share your experience in the comments. Someone reading your words might realize they are not becoming distant. They are becoming discerning. And if this reflection helped you understand a quiet shift happening in your own relationships, consider sharing this video with someone who might also be learning to choose connection more consciously. Because sometimes growth doesn't mean adding more people to your life. Sometimes it means finally recognizing who truly belongs there.